Hello and welcome to the On the Couch podcast, the podcast that gives you the view from the therapist chair. I'm your host, John Dennis, a licensed professional counselor. You're listening to OTC episode 52 with Ian Laidlaw, co-host of the Practice Imperfect podcast. Hello again, OTC listeners. Welcome back for another episode. Oh, wow. So I think 2020 is almost over. We've got past the election, I think, right? Who knows anymore? 2020 is just like the year that like will not go away. I keep saying, by the time somebody gets part of the sentence out, 2020 can't possibly get any worse. Like before they even finish, some other crazy thing happens. So I don't even want to say I hope we're done with all the craziness because we still got a little bit to go before the end of the actual year. But so I bringing an episode to you with Ian Laidlaw, and he is co-host, one of three hosts for the Practice Imperfect podcast. And it's a really cool project if you haven't stumbled across it or checked it out. So you can find them at practiceimperfectpodcast.com. And it's a show all about vulnerability and imperfection in psychotherapy. So they often interview other clinicians and just discuss some of that imperfection that therapists go through just like everybody else. And I had wanted to have Ian on because I really wanted to focus on that concept of imposter syndrome and being imperfect. And for those of you that may not know, imposter syndrome, it's a psychological phenomenon. So International Journal of Behavioral Science actually estimates about 70% of people experience imposter syndrome, or that feeling of being an imposter at some point in your life. So the idea that you've only succeeded due to luck, not because of your talent or your qualifications. It was first identified in 1978 by psychologists Pauline Rose Clance and Suzanne Imes. And so that idea that at any point you're going to be discovered. Other people are going to see and realize that you're an imposter. You don't know what you're doing. And I think especially during the COVID quarantine and all of this pandemic, it's really put a lot of pressure on people with parenting and teaching from home and working from home and, financial struggles and business failure, some business struggles, definitely for a lot. But that idea that, oh gosh, I don't have it all together, or I'm afraid that I'm going to fail. I'm afraid that I'm going to screw up, or I'm out of my depth or in over my head. And the reality that we all experience that at different points in our life, and often sometimes are out of our depth or in over our heads. I can definitely say as a parent, often, they'll like, gosh, am I doing this right? Like, is everybody else experiencing this? And I always say, I wish I could get everybody to go to group therapy. I know not everybody would because of the social anxiety and the vulnerability of being in a group setting. But one thing that so many people get from group therapy or support groups or things like that is that realization that I'm not crazy, I'm not alone. Other people have gone through this. Some people are further along in the process and doing better. Some people aren't as far as I am or not doing as well as I am. But I just really loved the Practice Imperfect podcast and hearing Ian and his co-hosts and their take on things. And so I wanted to have him on to discuss a little bit of that. So I hope you enjoyed the episode. Well, I have here tonight with me on the Couch podcast, Ian Laidlaw, who is an LCSW, and he is also co-host for the Practice Imperfect podcast. So welcome to the show, Ian.
Thanks, John.
I'm so glad we were finally able to put this together. You've been super flexible and generous with your time, and I know I've been very difficult to track down, so I really appreciate it.
I know, we both got little kids. I know what it's like.
Yes. Yeah. We're not controlling the ship.
Right. I'm recording in my basement so I don't wake them up. They're like 2 stories above me right now.
Why? You woke the bears. Why did you do that?
Yeah.
The almighty sleeping children. Okay. So, I originally wanted to have you on and just focusing on that space of imposter syndrome. So you were telling me off air your story. You have a very interesting path to where you're at today. Can you kind of give a little bit of that?
Yeah, it's pretty meandering. So I grew up in New Zealand. My dad's originally from Scotland. My mother is like a Scottish-Irish background. But I wound up in Japan quite randomly and on a student exchange program, and then got a job there after college. And actually, how I ended up in this field was I got a job doing international relations work. And then in Okinawa, we landed and I got in the taxi with my supervisor and this Australian guy, Paul. And on the way to the office, my supervisor turned around and was like, so there's these 2 jobs that need to be done. One's a newspaper editor and the other one's this sort of counseling job. And I turned to Paul and was like, oh, Paul, what do you want to do? And he's like, I want to do the newsletter. So I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'll be the counselor. And that's how I ended up in the field.
Process of elimination.
In a taxi in Okinawa on the way to a job, it was totally random. So 4 years in Okinawa doing that, which I loved. And then I was in England for a couple of years working with refugees. And then I got married in Okinawa to an American Japanese woman. And then I applied for a green card when I was in the UK. That came through, and then we moved back to the States, where I'm now a clinical social worker in New York.
Wow.
Quite a meandering sort of a path.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. Fated, that
it feels like it.
Yeah. So now you have an outpatient clinic. You are hosting the podcast, which is amazing, by the way. We'll
Thanks.
Definitely link to that so other people can check that out.
Thanks. It's the scariest thing I've ever done.
The podcasting?
Yeah, it's terrifying. But yes, thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah.
Say a little bit more about that.
Oh, it's just, because it's just exposure, really. It's like talking about all the terrifying things about ourselves as therapists and all the ways in which we struggle and feel like we're not sufficient and mess up and all the underlying stuff we go through, and just exposing it all. It's quite horrifying. It's in a field of everyone appearing pretty competent.
I was going to also say just the opposite of, I would say, almost everything that we're taught in grad school or were taught, I would say, of like,
that's what we're shooting for.
You're not supposed to expose yourself. You're not supposed to self-disclose, and obviously right. Things have changed in terms of like social media and podcasting and book writing and things like that. And
right.
So I can definitely see where it's quite nerve-wracking and terrifying.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of leaders in the field. Like Brené Brown is a big inspiration, obviously, for a lot of people. But I think there's a lot of people now kind of riding a wave of vulnerability, and I think it's time for a lot of us to kind of get on board. And especially in a world where so many people come to us for help who really struggle with not feeling like sufficient in their lives and not being able to tell anyone about it. And it feels important to some extent for the field of psychotherapy to model that a little bit, so that people aren't coming to us and also seeing, here's my perfect therapist with a perfect life who's amazing
perfect.
and a great helper. Yeah.
Well, and
So, yeah.
also just how strange that is, the facade of being so put together as the therapist, and the training and what you're focusing on with the client is like digging into the inner child and, kind of going back to a lot of past experiences that didn't go well and weren't handled perfectly. And sort of, the audacity to sit there and be like, nope, I'm good.
Yeah. Actually, I had a client tell me about this experience he had once, where he saw a really famous therapist in New York City. And he saw him for like about 4 months or something. And he said that, it was, his whole wall was full of credentials. And I'm sure he was an amazing therapist and did a really great job with a lot of people. But the limitation, I think, was that when the person I was working with, who always feels like an imposter and not good enough and, catastrophically depressed because of it, the gap was so wide that it just didn't he wasn't able to connect. It felt like, who is this perfect guy pretending to be, and sort of hiding behind all the credentials and not able to kind of connect in vulnerably. And the gap ended up making the person that I ended up working with feel worse, because the contrast, like, how can I measure up? And so, yeah, it doesn't work for everyone. I mean, I think that, that style of therapy works for a lot of people, but there's a lot of people out there who need something different. And, the profession is really founded on, the psychoanalytic style to some extent, the lying on the couch and having the analyst sit behind you and not a whole lot of interaction. But, that doesn't, the expert. Yeah. But I guess what we're sort of thinking about more is like how might the field function if the therapist isn't the expert, and is sort of more of a fellow traveler, someone who also struggles with shame and vulnerability and self-doubt. And, how might two people work together in that context?
And what have you seen come out of, all the projects that you've taken on over the last, little bit? How has that shaped you and that?
I think, I guess a couple of ways. One is, part of it is sort of dealing with my own sense of shame and imperfection, and trying to find a path to live alongside that. It's a lot of people probably experience this, but it never really goes away. I mean, you sort of just always living with it. It's not something I expect to ever be erased. But being able to sort of step into the podcast and expose it, along with a couple of great colleagues, Monica Griffin and Bill DeSiena, who are just wonderful people to work with and share a lot of the same stuff. And then have people write to us saying that, we've had people write to us who've said things like they've been in the field for 20 years carrying this, and they're in group practices and everyone else seems perfect. And they try to hide it, the idea that they are not, and that they're just sort of in this group practice faking it, and no one has worked it out yet. And they carry that anxiety constantly. But I think for me, being able to expose it along with Bill and Monica, and then have other people connect in and also share it, that space where you can step into and not hide anymore and be together with a community of other people who experience the same thing, it lifts a lot of the shame off. I mean, you can still sort of experience some of the anxiety around it. And I struggle with self-doubt constantly, when every day I'm in working with clients, it's there, in the middle of sessions, that's, I feel like, oh gosh, this person should see a real therapist, or like, what am I doing here? I've really no idea what I'm doing. But it's not, I think that it's an exposed fear with a community. It doesn't weigh quite as heavily, and so while it's always present, it's not taking over a lot of the time now. So I feel like I can relax into therapy a little more easily at this point, and that voice is a little quieter. Sure. But most of our hope is, I think, not so much for ourselves, but like, I think what we're really hoping for is other people to connect in with that idea and also feel like they don't have to hide so much.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I mean, it's not like this like gigantic anxious, puddle sitting in the therapy chair, like I have no idea what to, oh my gosh.
Right. Yeah, it's not an extreme. Yeah.
And I think more so, when we first start off, when you're fresh out of grad school, especially that first session or, first week on the job kind of thing. Yeah, I think there's a little bit more of that, like, oh my gosh, like this is real. Like I'm in the room with the client and they're expecting me to.
Right.
And
you really are faking it. You really are faking it.
And also that idea of, that concept, fake it till you make it, I think has been, pushed so much in so many things, that I could see, therapists and people the world over that, I've been carrying this for 20, 30 years and feeling like I've had to fake it.
Yeah, and there's this hanging question there. It's a great point, John. And like, when do I make it? Like, at what point when's the end point? And I think that a lot of people I think that there's some end point that you can get to. You read enough books, you go to enough courses, you do enough studying, you work with enough clients, and at some point you'll feel like you've crossed that line, you've made it. But that's just not there. It never happens. Like there's no you don't get a certificate at the end of 20 years and a public ceremony and the anxiety goes away. It doesn't work
I say that all the time about the grief process. Where there's never like, oh, you're done.
Oh, yeah.
Congratulations. You'll never struggle with this ever again.
Right. Right. Right.
Yeah. I think the making it point is that ability to recognize it when, that anxiety hits and recognize the trigger for it and, okay, what does that connect back to? Or, okay, this is what I need to do in the face of that and sort of be able to shift that at will, I guess I would say.
Yeah, so it's a good point. And I think I think what you're referring to is sort of the internal work we do, right? Like that when we have, the observing ego, we're in the session and we're self-reflective, we're engaged with the person we're working with and helping them out and thinking about what we're doing there, but we're also sort of self-observant and trying to, get our own stuff out of the way. But I think, what we're really curious about in Practice Imperfect is there a step further? Like, can you actually expose the uncertainty, and can that be a really important experience for your client? I mean, it's obviously not just kind of like you're laying everything out there constantly.
Then it'd be your session. Yeah.
That's super annoying. Right. But is there a role for some exposure, right? It's interesting because I was working with a guy on Monday, and he, I'm trying to help him. He was a social worker and sort of got, what do you call it? Re-licensed or
he
what do you call
renewed his license or sort of re-upped.
Renewed his license. Thank you. Re-upped. Yeah, why don't we go with that? And so he was talking about how he feels like he doesn't belong in the field anymore, and that he's not fit to be there, and he's faking it. And if he does get clients, then he'll just be insufficient and incompetent and won't know what to do. And so this idea struck me, and I was like, hey, just to let you know, that's what I'm feeling right now about myself in the room with you. And what's it like to hear that, and what's your experience of me right now? So because there's a path to recognizing that the sense of feeling like you're not sure what you're doing, or you're not sufficient, or you're faking it, or you don't belong, or and the shame associated with that, that's not eliminating that as not a prerequisite to being able to do the work, and that in some ways, when we can model and carry that alongside a person, that it removes it as a barrier to their own path forward. And it's really, I mean, there's lots of other ways that this works, but I think those moments are really important for people. There's in the show we talk about, there's this guy, I'm just trying to remember his name, and I forgot his name in the show as well, and now I'm forgetting his name on your show.
The cycle continues.
So I know, right? Yeah, it's a beautiful circle. So he's a guy out in California, a Jesuit priest, and he runs a organization called Homeboy Industries, and he has this idea that he talked about. He was on Being, which is that NPR show. And one of the things that really struck me when he was talking is he has this idea about that work with a client is a journey of mutual growth, and if it's not, it can inhibit the client's growth. But that there has to be an idea of that both of you contribute to one another, and that both of you are incomplete, I guess, and insufficient in that relationship. And through the experience of mutual growth, people grow together. Because in some ways, the person you're working with, to an extent, needs to know that they also impact you, that they have something to offer. They're not just kind of another, because so many people we work with grew up in families where they were, unseen or worse, and the idea that they can work with someone who they respect and that they can influence that person and help that person grow becomes a lived experience of restoration from the childhood experience, So the vulnerability and exposure and shame from the exposure from the therapist can have a really important impact on the client. And some people would argue that's like necessary for some of that healing state.
Yeah, I could see where that would be of huge benefit. So to kind of back up a bit, in terms of this, term imposter syndrome, I would say in the last decade, it's probably gotten a lot more focus and, the actual use of that term.
Yeah.
What does that mean? When you hear that, what does it mean to you?
Yeah. I think for me, it's quite a personal thing, isn't it? I think for me is, it's the sense that I'm in disguise, that somehow, I've stumbled, and that's true really to an extent. I've stumbled into this field unintentionally.
Through a taxi.
Right. And in a taxi, right? And it was never my plan. I haven't really done any preparation for it, but somehow I'm in here. And there's all these people around me who have been planning this for a long time and really kind of know what they're doing and have a ton of credentials and training and certificates and whatever. And somehow they haven't figured out yet that I don't really belong there. And maybe I talk a good game. Like I kind of, if someone asks me what they should do with this client, then I could sort of tell them, oh, you should try this or this or this. But it's not stuff that I'm really using myself, or I'm really deeply aware of how to use it, and somehow they believe me and they think it's good advice, but it's not that it really is, So this continuing sense that you're just in disguise in the field, and it's that's my experience in as a clinical social worker. But I think there's it's funny because we get a lot of email from people who aren't in the field, who are like engineers or other stuff, who just sort of stumbled on the podcast and resonate, right? That there's the same experience that persists in lots of fields.
I was going to say, I feel like this is more just the human condition. It's
right.
Unless you've done a lot of work on yourself, and like we're saying, we don't feel like it ever does actually completely go away. Or you deal with narcissism, and then it's a whole other problem.
Yeah, that it's everyone's experience. Yeah, it's like the inbuilt. What is it? They call it the in order to survive in society, we need to ensure that we fit with other people, and so shame is the built-in mechanism by which we're able to gauge whether or not we're doing a behavior that might result in us being excluded. So it's this sort of continuous fear that we carry that's somewhat adaptive that helps us continue to fit in society and avoid behaviors that might get us excluded. But it's sort of it's less needed in modern society because we're not quite so dependent on other people to survive. But it's still this sort of ever-present fear that gets sort of misinterpreted or blown out of proportion, often through, I think, child experiences that feel like a confirmation of not being sufficient or not belonging.
And yeah, that idea of like, okay, it seems like this is, default setting, everybody comes standard issue with some of this stuff. And is that nature and nurture in terms of where does it come from?
Right. Yeah, well, I mean, for a lot of the people we work with, and our hunches, a lot of people in the field, I mean, there's this built-in aspect, right, which is the nature part, the adaptive, keep fit in society piece. But I think then, and what you're referring to is that it exists on sort of a spectrum for everyone of different levels. I think where it becomes problematic is in the nurture part. So, and that's often what we notice among, at least I can speak to sort of the field of therapists, because I supervise and train a lot of people, and I've heard the story over and over, that for a lot of us in the field, we've grown up with parents who had like depression, or there was alcoholism, or domestic violence, or trauma, or something. And what occurs in those situations often is that the child takes on the role of trying to prop up the parent, because the parent's not functioning that well, and the child doesn't know that it's not their job and they're not capable of it, because no one comes in and says to them, oh, you're not developmentally ready for this, or that you really shouldn't be taking this on. So the child goes in believing that they're capable and not recognizing that it doesn't belong to them, and then ultimately fails at it, right? Because as a child, you're not capable of fixing your parents. You can't. There's nothing you can really do about it. You just have to sort of figure out how to survive alongside it. Yeah. So that sense of failure,
then figure it out later.
Yeah, yeah, ideally, yeah, in therapy. So that sense of failure becomes the imposter syndrome, right? It's this internal experience where you failed your first primary task. Like, I'm really not good enough. I can't even help my parents. Like, I couldn't get over this thing here. And so
can't make them happy, can't fix their emotional state.
Yeah. And then most of us carry that into adulthood, and carry this sort of, I guess, like a child self, right? Who doesn't believe they're good enough, who we'll go and give what is like a speech or something like that, or be asked to speak on a podcast or whatever, and this child comes forward and is like, whoa, don't don't do that, don't you don't belong, you're not good enough, you're faking it, you remember that thing that you failed that was really important at the beginning, you do really want to sort of expose that to everyone. It's like this child state that keeps coming forward and trying to get us to hide so we're not exposed. I think that's that story I've heard over and over and over and over and over again amongst therapists. And I think that's what draws therapists to the field, because the idea that you continue to reenact
to save somebody.
Right. It's an ongoing reenactment that we're seeking, and because we're doing the same thing, we're believing that a person's healing is in our hands, and that we're capable of fixing other people. That's obviously another endless failure, right? Because we're not. It's therapy, something different.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it becomes like
save them and,
right. Yeah. And so you're just on another endless track, reenacting your childhood and failing. So it's just
great.
Yeah.
We're all doomed.
Yeah. I mean, I think over time I think that's over time we figure out that it's something else, and that's back to the. If we can expose that with each other, and open up about our shame and a sense of imperfection, and realize that's actually everyone's experience, then it's the power goes out of it, right? It becomes we're not sitting alone in darkness anymore. That's the overcoming part, I think.
And like you were saying, I think definitely the field of therapy is shifting in terms of vulnerability, but I think also just the world. I mean, I think a lot of people are becoming more comfortable sharing, especially their battles with mental health.
Oh yeah.
Substance abuse or whatever it might be.
Right.
I would imagine that will start to have a positive effect, especially from the parenting end of things.
Right.
Just kind of leveling with your kids at some point. You don't want to like completely obliterate their childhood and their innocence. And, like, parenting is awful. It's the hardest thing I've ever done.
Yeah.
But I think through that vulnerability, being able to apologize and being able to talk with your kids and hear their anger or frustration with, a decision you've made, or, kind of work through some of that stuff.
Right, and not sort of interpreting it as like they're telling me I'm a bad parent and feeling like we need to defend ourselves from that. Right. Exactly. Yeah. I think, and that becomes really important modeling for our kids that, my parent is someone who can hear me and accept feedback and change and wants to change because they love me and that I'm important. And that shows that. Mm-hmm. And that my parent is also a model of not having to be perfect and that you can do well and be acceptable and also be imperfect and mess up and recover. Yeah, we talk about this actually a lot. And like when I'm supervising, a lot of people come to me, the people I'm supervising, and tell me how they messed up. And one of the things we always talk about that seems to help people feel better is it doesn't matter. Like it's not an issue that you mess up. Like it becomes an opportunity because the work is in the recovery. And that's what happens over time is people start looking forward to messing up because it's when you mess up with a person and then you try and figure out how to get back. In those moments we attempt to reattach to one another, there's a ton of really important stuff that happens in that moment. But there's ideas about kind of worthiness and the desire for affection and what it means that my therapist will own this and wants to figure me out and wants to come back to me. There's like really, really, really great things that happen in those moments. So that messing up is not something we have to protect ourselves from.
It made me think of in talking with Lori Gottlieb, she talks about the rupture and repair and with supervisees certainly and in the practice that I co-own and supervise, I think so many people, especially if they've recently gotten their license or are working on their license, attaining it, that fear of, oh gosh, I screwed up, the SWAT team is going to like come out of the sky and like take my, I'm no longer going to be able to work with people. They're going to like blackball me.
Right. Right.
And that's it. It's over.
Yeah. It's like the negative Facebook review.
Yeah. I've seen a lot of interesting things that get done with the negative Facebook reviews.
Yeah, certainly. I think the trick is like the rupture and repair idea is a really important one. There's a thing though is that like if we're not willing to kind of own our imperfection and shame in those moments, the repair can kind of go wrong because we can still try to make an attempt to repair, but hold on to power and not expose ourselves. Because sure. There's like we could go into the client sort of transference or something like that, and who are you experiencing me as, but.
Well, it's almost when you think of almost like gaslighting or like the fake apology where it's
right.
Well, I only did that because you said this, and
right, or your reaction to me is about your stuff, and that that I really didn't do anything wrong, and let's figure your stuff out, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is I think like textbook gaslighting.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
You are literally talking about their, diagnosis or their symptoms or whatever.
Yeah. It's easy to use a person's stuff against them. But, I think that's where like modeling vulnerability throughout the work becomes important in then how you use that in the repair and recover together. I mean, we do these on the show. We do these. Is it okay to plug the show?
Go. Yeah, plug away.
We do these. It's not really plug,
no.
But we do these.
That's it. This interview's over.
I'm done. All right, there we go. Are you still going to release it?
Yeah.
So this is a good moment. So we do these role plays of that where we try to aim at an unrepairable situation. Where there's a rupture created by the therapist, and there's no possible way to fix it. You can't actually clean it up. So they're actually really sweaty hand, role plays. I still listen back to my own one. I get terrible.
Like I just got kind of sweaty, like thinking about it. I'm like, oh God, is he going to put me through one of these? Like,
yeah. No. I won't do that to you, John. Well, actually, do you want to do one? We can do one, and then I'll put it on our show.
Yeah?
But so the first one we did was where you have a therapist who has promised a client that they will never tell their supervisor about them for whatever reason, which we don't go into, and then forgets that, and then accidentally lets it slip that they've been talking to their supervisor about them, and it just creates this massive rupture that you can't kind of just fix. Like there's no way to kind of correct that. But the interesting part of it is then how, when you're trying to move to the repair work, that becomes largely about the therapist's mess and imperfection and exposure of that. There's no way through it but to go in that direction, and the client continues, just won't let go of it. And it's really interesting to listen to how people try to figure out how to sustain a relationship alongside. It goes back to your point, John, like that, you can't, there's no end point, right? So how do you continue to live with that? And I think in a world where we're looking for like the perfect relationship, like this, to be perfectly understood and accepted, there's a healing idea in that that's not necessary. Like we can actually have rupture and live alongside the rupture, and that it's the attempt that where there's affection and attachment and connection, and understanding and experiencing the person's desire to continue to connect and own their stuff, right? That's really important. So as scary as that can be.
Well, and it made me think of, I've been spending a lot of late nights scrolling through the internet, and I really enjoy Awkward Yeti and the Heart and Brain cartoons.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if you're familiar with those.
Yeah, I haven't watched those.
Yeah, that idea of just like replaying, your not the greatest hits track, but the worst hits track of like your blooper reel.
Oh yeah.
Of like, it also made me think of the like Chris Farley, like so stupid.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Why did I do that? Why did I say that? Why did
Right.
Yeah, the inability we have to let ourselves off of the hook, especially when there's been no repair attempt, when like
right.
there's no way to fix that. You're just kind of stuck with that, like, well, screwed that one up.
Yeah, especially when our childhood has been one where our parents weren't able to make the repair, and then we begin to fear that we create the same damage in others that our parents did to us. I think that sort of happens largely on an unconscious level, but that's kind of the fear, right? Because it was so, for many of our childhoods, it was so heavy to carry that, and it was never spoken about, or like never allowed to be discussed. Yeah.
Never allowed to, the sort of the family secret, or the like just swept under the rug.
Yeah.
You're listening to OTC episode 52 with Ian Laidlaw, co-host of the Practice Imperfect podcast. We'll be right back after a brief word from our sponsor.
Would you like to talk to a counselor but can't find the time? Would you rather talk to someone from the comfort of your own home? If so, Parenting and Family Solutions is here to help. We now offer teletherapy to all clients who reside in the state of Pennsylvania. Using our secure portal, you can have a video session with your counselor using a laptop, desktop computer, or smartphone. Visit our website to learn more at www.parentfamilysolutions.com or give us a call at 717-602-5560 to see if teletherapy might be a good fit for you. Let us help you build a stronger family and a healthier you.
You talk about, in the schema therapy, that technique of reparenting. Can you kind of go into that a little bit?
Oh, sure. I mean, I have to say that I'm not a schema therapist, but I've been to 2 trainings. So, okay. Yeah, there we go.
Thank you for your honesty and disclosure.
Thanks. Yeah. I got some CU credits off that one. But there's this really cool thing in it. And I think the reason it works is because clients pick it up and run with it. You don't have to kind of know exactly how to do it. I mean, feel free if the Schema Therapy Institute ends up listening to this to email me and tell me I'm wrong about it. But
you're going to get a lot of hate mail.
Yeah, that's the plan. But it's really cool. it's really cool because you can take, so there's this, one of the ideas in there is this, we carry this child state, right, with us, like this child who is trying to be good enough and fix their parents and finally get it right, and then get the love and attention and affection that they wish they could have, right? But is carrying this sort of idea of failure around with them. And that it's that child who keeps coming forward in situations and getting us frozen and anxious. And so in schema therapy, there's this really cool thing you can do. I think it's called restorative reparenting. I never remember the names of anything, but I think that's it. What you can do is
if you say it with confidence and you fake it till you make it, then
all right. It's restorative
people will believe
reparenting.
you.
Yeah, it's restorative reparenting. That's what it is. So what I could do later, John, is I can just go on the Wikipedia page for schema therapy and I'll rename it. And then I'll have been right. But you can elicit their child state. So when you notice that they are becoming anxious or they're talking about a situation where they felt like a failure or an imposter, there's this really cool question you can ask, which is like, how do you feel right now? And often the person's able to say like, I feel like I'm 6 years old or 8 years old again. And then you can ask them, can you speak about what that 8-year-old self is feeling? And they can start talking about it. And that child will come into the room alongside you and your adult client. And then you can begin to speak with that child. It's a completely amazing idea, but it's really real because any therapist who's done anything like this will know that child state is so powerfully present. That as long as you have them talk a little bit, they'll be elicited in the room with you. And then you can start speaking with the child and healing them, because you can do the thing that your parents never did. Give them the love and normalization and affection and attention that they wish for. And they will reject it initially because they will say, well, if I just did the dishes and cooked and cleaned enough, then it would have been okay. It really was my fault that all this stuff happened. And you can keep speaking with them. You can have like an ongoing conversation with them about that stuff. And it's quite powerful as you watch. It elicits a ton of emotional material, but it gives the person a means to have a conversation with the child then when they're out in their life doing stuff. And it comes up for me when when I have to give presentations, like that child in me is like, careful here, Ian. You'll get halfway through their presentation, you realize you're out of material, and then there'll be still a half hour left, and you won't know what to do, and everyone's going to think you're an idiot. And but I can now have a conversation with that child. I can be like, Ian, it's little Ian, it's fine. Like, we've been doing this for a little while now. It's never happened. I know you're anxious. I know you're scared. We're going to be okay here. This is all right. And you can, loosely, you can begin to interact with your child's self. And I think this sort of restorative parenting technique is a really beautiful way to do that. But what I've noticed is like the fact that child is so powerfully present for the client, they pick up on it right away. Like a lot of my clients, when I just do it one time, will then come back the next week saying they did it all through the week. It's just such an easy thing. It's so intuitive. Yeah. Once the person realizes that there is a child there, that they can begin to talk with them. So,
and I'm so glad you were able to speak to it, because it is such a powerful exercise, and like you were saying, just the teaching it to them once, and they're able to do that.
Amazing.
Out in the real world, doing whatever it is they do, they can kind of go through that for themselves. And I'm trying to remember. Now it's my turn to forget names and situations. There was essentially somebody was speaking about the idea of recognizing the fear and that sort of inner child, and kind of speaking back to it almost like they did it from the example of like a family trip, and the idea that like the adult is driving, and I'm steering the car, and I'm deciding where we go and how we get there, and that sort of childlike fear and anxiety and imposter part is allowed to be a passenger, but they are not controlling the car. And, they may give input on the radio station or, when we stop for bathroom breaks or things like that, but they're not controlling the ship. And yeah, so that idea of just recognizing that it has a place at the table, but being able to kind of go back and forth, speaking to that childlike self is so huge.
Yeah, like they're not in control.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which often I would say, like, we allow them to take the wheel. We just sort of hand over the controls.
The schema technique has this added piece to it, which is really interesting, that is one of integration. What you'll notice is if you use the sort of reparenting idea, it's a way to bring the child in alongside with you. And then people will sometimes report that the child is growing up over time. Like when you begin to ask them, how old do you feel? They will be like 8, and then sometime later they'll be 12, and then sometime later they'll be 13. And it's not, they don't put the child off to the side. Because quite often, like, the strategy we use to try and deal with the imposter syndrome part of us is to get the kid to shut up, because we're so tired of hearing that anxiety voice. We
Negative
just want
track,
them to be quiet. But the reparenting idea is like a way of kind of embracing them, like you do with a child. Grow up with them and help them come alongside you and see them as being a person of value, and want to kind of bring them along with you into the experience, that you can teach them how to live through the experiences and not have to be anxious about them. There's 1,000 different ways to do this, but I think the schema therapy technique is teaching them how to drive, kind of, it's kind of a different sort of a similar kind of idea, but like it's there's embracing happening there. I think maybe that's important for people who had the unacceptable child self and not the good parenting, and they need to restore that through a parenting relationship with their child state.
Now, in terms of not everybody's had the adverse child experiences and the bad parenting and the trauma and things like that. In the work that you've done, the podcast and the supervision, what are some of the other places you've seen some of that imposter grow out of?
It's an interesting question. I'm sure it's there for other people, and we actually asked that question in the show at some point, if people could write to us who haven't had a difficult childhood and still have the imposter syndrome. But I feel like I'm yet to meet anyone where that's the case. So, I mean, that's my experience with all my clients so far. I don't know if that's just chance, but all of them who carry that, it stems from some kind of adverse child experience. Frequently, they don't remember it at the beginning. It sometimes takes like 6 months or a year for them to remember that there was a problem, right? Because the child's state is often unaware that something is wrong. They're carrying this responsibility and sense of failure, but they have no sort of, they're not talking to anyone about it. So there's no comparison point for them to realize that something happened or that it was a problem. They just assume that it was like normal. A lot of kids grow up in situations that are pretty bad, but don't know any different. So sometimes it takes a while to kind of help them figure out that something did happen. And that was certainly my case. I mean, I think, my childhood, there's a lot of memory gaps in my childhood, and I thought it was pretty average, but it wasn't until I went to therapy that I figured out that stuff happened to me and that there was a reason why I ended up the way I did. And it was completely mind-blowing to me that I had reasons for being the way that I was, that it wasn't just kind of like genetic or, whatever else we think it is about. So I'm yet to really strike someone where that's not the case, and that's both amongst clients and also all the people I supervise, It's weird. I mean, I'd be interested to hear from someone who has it where that wasn't what it grew out of. I don't know, John, how are you doing with that? Want to talk?
Well, I think, of course, yes. I think that idea of, it's not always, it doesn't have to be on that level, but obviously,
as a spectrum,
as a child, it's significant to us in that child's state.
Yeah.
That, maybe it was, I mean, it could be things like, a major move or,
unfamiliar experiences.
I've even had things like, and I, a lot of times I almost sort of, refer to it like the creation of champagne, where it was just like the right set of circumstances, the right ingredients at the right time, and like voila.
Yeah, sure.
there it
Yeah.
is. But they weren't intending to do that.
Right.
It was like accident.
Yeah, I guess also in situations where there's like domestic violence and stuff like that, you can, in catastrophically abusive relationships, you can take someone who had no earlier issues and destroy their self-esteem and develop the sort of sense of them as being not good enough. Yeah, I mean,
and with people that I guess I would say that it's like chronic, or it's like lifelong. That idea of nurture, we pick up the baton. Like we start nurturing the imposter syndrome in ourselves at a certain point, and then we just sort of dig that record and groove in deeper.
Yeah.
Throughout our lives.
Yeah, it can become
just repeating those messages to ourselves.
Right. Like it can become self-reinforcing at a point.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that that's so much of what I deal with, but also I think a lot of the clients that I work with of those cognitive distortions and those self messages, that it's out of a place of defense mechanism and protection and things like that, but it's kind of that like, well, is it really working for you? Because I don't know.
Right. Yeah, I think the sticky, like it does exist on a spectrum. You're right. I think where it gets really sticky is where there is a child state in there who lived it, and I think that creates sort of a different thing. So you can have someone who had a healthy childhood and then the problems develop later, like through disability or abuse or something like that as an adult, and then there's some difficult recovery from that, but you still have like a healthy child state living under that I think you can re-access at points. Mm-hmm. Where I feel like the imposter syndrome gets really sticky is when the child state is stuck there. That's because you start out with it, and then there's not like a reference point for going back to where it wasn't there, and that's where it gets harder. I feel, and maybe maybe it's my caseload because I just take Medicare, so I work mostly with older adults, and I think maybe it's just got something to do with when you're an older adult coming into therapy, other than catastrophic life change situations, it's often like a long-term kind of present underlying situation that runs right back to childhood.
Okay. Yeah. So they've been dealing with it or running from it their whole lives, and had a lot of time to build up defenses around it.
Yeah. As we do.
Yeah. What would you say to general public? I mean, outside of therapists and supervisees and things like that, of the teachers, the businessmen, the homeschool parents, that feel the weight of that. I'm a fraud. I'm an imposter.
Join us. I mean, we're all like that to an extent, right? I think come into the fold. I think the more that we don't. So I think Brené Brown was really interesting with this in that massive TED talk she did, because which it was one of her TED talks, but where she talked to the audience and she was saying, this is like the
I think they're all massive.
They're all massive.
At this point,
Yes. Yeah, it's huge. But she was talking to the audience at one point and saying, when you see people come up here, this is like the failure conference, right? People are talking about their failures and kind of what they learned. And when you come up here exposing yourself, you feel terrified, but when you're watching these people, don't you see it as courage, right? The idea that people will expose their shame and expose themselves and talk about their failures and open up about their uncertainty. From an observing standpoint, that's seen as highly courageous. John, you were talking earlier about like how there's a lot of this happening with people talking about substance abuse, all the little videos that are on YouTube and Facebook and what's the new thing now? TikTok? I don't know.
TikTok.
So, and we see that as courageous, right? Like that the exposure of shame and a sense of imperfection and messing up and failure is not perceived by other people as a reason to reject someone. It's perceived as courageous to come out and be open about yourself and what you're having a hard time with. And because it encourages other people who are going through the same thing to also step into that space where they're suffering alone. So it's not something I think that we have to hide as a society. So that would be, I think, what I would say to the people who have the experience is, take courage, step out and talk to people about what you're going through. And it will be large. If the people you're talking to are decent people, it will be received as courage. And I think over and over again, when you work with people who take a step forward and do that, all these other people come out of the woodwork in their circle saying, oh, I went through that, or, oh, here's what I'm going through. And it becomes like this way of, because what we're looking for in deep relationships with people is vulnerable connection. And it's in those moments of us exposing ourselves and then other people meeting us in that space, that's where real affection is built. Really deep connection and communication. That's what we hunger for, right? Like to be seen at a deeper level and understood and accepted, and not just based on our surface self, like the disguise that we have on that where we're trying to present a sense of competence, but that it's under that, like all the things that we're uncertain about ourselves. When those can be seen and accepted, that's where real connection is. And it's so healing to experience that with other people. You have to choose the right people, right? I don't tell anyone,
yes,
go out there and just like put a Facebook post up about all your stuff.
Be vulnerable.
Yeah. But there's beauty. There's beauty in there.
Yeah. I mean, beauty and strength, and it's kind of that that doesn't make sense. The strength in vulnerability, because so much of our society pushed the other message for so long of whether that's the British stiff upper lip or the like boys don't cry or any of that.
Right.
But yeah, like you were saying, there's a lot of strength in it. There's a lot of power in it. It is beautiful. But to your point, the important to know who you're doing that with and pick the right people.
Yeah, that's really important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now to kind of play devil's advocate a little bit, I mean, do you get much pushback? I think of some of the stereotypical, macho career paths of like soldiers or first responders, or, I think of, it made me think of like, if I was about to go into heart surgery, I don't want my heart surgeon like confiding in me that like, I really don't know what I'm doing. I'm really nervous.
Right.
But yeah, that idea of some of those pockets, it's so much harder to combat that message of strength and vulnerability.
Yeah, I think so. It's really interesting. You mentioned the surgery idea because we talk about this in the first episode a little bit. I think how it still works there, but it looks a little different. I think because I had, last year I went through like several minor procedures, and it was, and I had a lot of interaction with a lot of doctors around it, and it was really annoying because, I'm very deferential to doctors, and it's my British background, so I don't really push or ask questions or anything like that. I'm not a natural New Yorker, I'm not like, I'm not just yelling at people, arguing with them. So, but the doctor, because I saw the same doctor over about the space of a year, about 4 times, and I have this feeling like he forgot some stuff, because there's a couple of procedures I think that they did that were unnecessary, because some things we talked about in the first visit, it felt like he forgot about them, and so moved ahead with some. I don't want to talk in detail about it, but like that's a whole nother podcast. But then forgot, right? And then so I went through some of the stuff I think unnecessarily. And so what would vulnerability look like there, right? It's not. I don't think it's like the doctor saying, "I have no idea what I'm doing," right? But I think it would be.
Yes.
I think it would be a doctor saying, "Hey, like I've had a lot of experience in this, and I generally know what I'm doing, but I'm going to be depending on you to help me out, right? And that." I need your feedback in order to do this well. And if you notice that I'm doing something wrong, or I seem to have forgotten something, or I'm I'm advising something that doesn't fit with what we'd originally talked about, like tell me about it and let's figure it out together. See, that would be amazing, right? Because then a lot of stuff could be avoided. I don't think it would undermine my confidence in the doctor. I'd feel a little worried about it because I feel like there's this idea in the medical profession that you want your doctor to be the best doctor ever and perfect, because you just want to, like a child, put yourself in your parents' hands and have them take care of everything. But in the end, like what would work a lot better, and I think ultimately feel more satisfying, is the vulnerable doctor, like the one who involves you in the process, that where you're a participant in some of the decision making, and that it's not not conflictual, but that it's mutual and shared. So I think it's really a question of like, how does vulnerability work in each different area of life? It's different, in therapy. I remember the guy's name, by the way. I don't know when we talked about it, but like this is 40 minutes later. Greg Boyle. Father Greg Boyle is the guy from Homeboy Industries. I did it. I'm not an imposter.
I had looked it up and I was like, I'll let it go.
Yeah. No, I want to credit him. He's a good guy.
Yes. Yeah. Definitely seems like I wasn't familiar with it, so I definitely want to check into him and hear what he's about. Yeah. So, well, and like you were saying, I think it's a little bit of a different conversation, but having that term gets thrown around so much in management of like, I have an open door policy, and how many people don't actually, like, I don't believe that. I don't see any evidence of that. But to be able to, acknowledge, hey, it's important for you to be able to speak up. And I, as a therapist, I try to do that in the initial intake a lot of times, where I acknowledge there are times where you have to refer. There are times where you, the client, aren't going to feel like, this is working, or it's a good fit, or things like that. And you need to be able to speak to that. You need to be able to bring that up. And I try to acknowledge, like, I get that that's uncomfortable. I get most people aren't going to do that. But hopefully in me at least acknowledging it right off the bat, it may help them down the road. I don't know.
Yeah, I think the complication, exactly. I think you have to sort of lead with it at the beginning and create an environment where the person knows that you are interested in their feedback. The thing that makes it really difficult for a lot of our clients is that they've lived with parents growing up where that wasn't possible, right? Like the parent was inaccessible, or it was dangerous to do that, or it was rejected, or they were gaslighted, or whatever. So you can lay the groundwork at the beginning of the therapy, but then how do you continue to lean in with that to with a client who might have trouble telling you, to gradually build to a place where they can eventually say to you, actually, you really made me angry last week. And how do we also tolerate that in ourselves, like anticipating those moments? So that's where it gets quite complicated, is because vulnerability isn't like a setup. It's like it's a lived experience, and the therapy is an ongoing part of the work, and continuously reaching for those moments where there's an opportunity to kind of expose, so I have to go, actually have to do this next week with a guy, because he came in on Friday last week, and we have this kind of agreement that, when you take your car to the mechanic and you just need the tires changed, and the mechanic's like, well, I made this list, right? And you're like, just change the tires, right? So I have some of my clients are like, I like that, right? Like they're here with me to do like one thing that they want, and I see everything that I could do, and they're not interested in those things, which is fine. That's their decision as to kind of what they want to engage in. And I have this one guy who, he's one of those people. He just wants to come into the session, have someone to talk to who's understanding, and leave, and that helps him deal with life, right? And that's really important to him. And I blew it last Friday. There was this really juicy moment, and I couldn't let go of it. And I pushed in really hard, and I wouldn't let go. And he was getting annoyed, and I could tell, but like sometimes I dig my heels in. I don't know why. I've got to figure that out in therapy at some point. And so he left angry. Like he left really, not obviously, but now that I know him, I know he's really annoyed with me. So I've got to go in next Friday and figure out a way to invite him into that, which it's hard for him to do that because I can't share details, but like he grew up in a household where that wasn't possible. And so I'm facing now a challenge of like, what's my best shot at helping him to tell me that I got it wrong, right? And no, I can't just be like, you can tell me about it. Like, I really have to figure out, like, he's the kid now, and and living in this household, re-experiencing this moment of people who more than don't have his best interests at heart, but like are just doing damage. What does he need to hear, like, to be able to tell me about his experience with me? It's quite challenging,
Well, and I was going to say, separate from your scenario, I think as therapists, paying attention to the body language and how did things wrap up, and sometimes the next session picking that back up and saying I wanted to kind of check in a little bit because it seemed like where things left off, or I noticed when I said this, it really seemed like that bothered you or that frustrated you, and I'd like to talk with you about that, or would you be comfortable talking about that?
Yeah.
Kind of is, continuing to have that open door policy, so to speak.
And I think we can push it further, because I think we can, in that moment, we can still be perceived as holding on to power, right? Because we're saying my door's open, but we're still sitting in our office, so
the therapist chair.
Right.
Yes.
So like, what do we need to do to step out of that? Like, how do we actually create a sense of safety for the client to come in? And I think part of that is like, is in the exposure idea, right? Exposing shame and vulnerability and imperfection. And so I think leading in with something, I have to still figure out how I'm going to do this on Friday, but leading in with something that's more like, hey, I think I really blew it, last week. And it's not unusual for me to blow this sometimes, because I know as a therapist, I'm also a person. And, I know what you want from me. I know that you want to come in and you want to unload and have me empathize and leave feeling better. And you've told me that, and I broke that promise to you last week. I really did. And when I was doing it, I knew I was breaking the promise, and I don't know what happened. I just couldn't let go of it. I dug my heels in. I saw you getting angry, and I just wasn't letting go of it. I'm really interested in what that was like for you. Me really blowing it, like that. I need to step in and with my own stuff in a way, and not in like where it's defensive, but I'm really interested in, like, I'm doing.
What was that like for you?
Yeah, I'm doing half of the work for him, I think, so he doesn't have the job of like telling me that he's angry, because I've already done that work for him. Like, and that's what the child's wish is that the parent had done, right? Like the wish is the parent had said, I know I'm blowing this. Like, I'm drinking, and when I'm drunk, I'm scary, and I know I'm really blowing this for you, and I care about you, and I want to hear what that's been like for you. Like, the wish is for the parent to finally do that. The wish was never fulfilled. Mm-hmm. Like, how do we do that as a therapist becomes this kind of really important question. Let me just say, I don't think every therapist has to be like this. I'm not setting up a model for every therapist to emulate. That's not, because there's really excellent.
Now what you're doing.
Yeah. There's brilliant therapists out there, like really amazing CBT therapists, where it's like straight CBT, and, psychoanalysts who are really brilliant, and it's, there's no vulnerability, or like, it's a very blank slate kind of thing. And that's really, really important, because you need variety in the field. I just want to be clear. I'm not trying to get everyone to like lose it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and to that point, some people don't want that.
Right.
They're not looking for that in a therapist. Whereas we've been talking throughout this interview where that for some that's exactly what they need, and it's such a powerful thing.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. It gets complicated when I feel like I don't know, is this my narcissism? I feel like that's what they need, and they don't want it. then what do you do? I don't know. Then it gets messy.
Well, yeah. Then it's
then I'm the mechanic.
That's a whole other podcast episode.
Yeah.
Yes, being the expert, and
right.
I'm choosing for you what you.
Yep.
Yeah. So I guess to kind of bring it home here with where you're headed with the podcast, and it seems like such an amazing project. What do you hope to see come out of it in the next year, or are there other projects that you have in the works? Or I know you mentioned about you like to stretch yourself too thin. So
I'm thinking of continuing that. How thin can I go? I think is the we're taking a break between season 1 and 2 right now. We just wound up. Well, we sort of wound up season 1. I had sort of this anxiety thing, and I wasn't able to bring myself to listen to the last episode that we recorded. So the last episode is a 20-minute episode of me talking about how I wasn't able to make the last episode. But that feels really appropriate for the show. So,
is that a bonus episode?
Yeah, I guess so. It's like I don't know what it is. There's a lost tape right now, basically. So we're on this kind of break. It'll probably be like a 6 to 10 months kind of break, and we'll start recording episodes for season 2 during that time. But in the meantime, we're developing like a training that we're going to bench test locally on this vulnerability idea in psychotherapy, and the ways we can sort of stretch into that. So we're going to try that out and see how that works.
And do you already have information for that, or dates? Or
no, I'm getting together with Bill tomorrow morning for breakfast, and we're going to start fleshing it out, and then. The agency where I work at, we're going to bench test it, because I have to run a seminar every week on a different psychotherapy topic. So we're going to start testing it out there just to see how it lands. And then there's a place in Orange County that invited us to give a training. So I think once that happens, we'll put some news out on our website. We're going to try that out. And then the other thing is we have a Facebook group which we're building. That I don't know how many people are in there now, probably about 800 or something. It's, I don't know, that's small for Facebook groups, but it's growing to support therapists in talking about their experience of shame and imperfection and vulnerability in psychotherapy work. So we're working, the three of us are in that group and working with people and trying to create a space for sharing experiences. So we're kind of working on that right now. And then I'm teaching a class at a graduate school, so I need to get that out of the way before I can kind of dive into more of the practice and perfect stuff. But the bulk of our work is going to be on this training and then developing the second season. So we're really excited for that to happen. And
just to ask really quick, and feel free to not self-disclose, but do you kind of have to almost like use your wife as like a sounding board of like, am I doing it again? Am I stretching myself too thin? And she's able to like speak to that and like, no, you can't take on this project.
Christy, my wife, is amazingly supportive and just an amazing companion and support. I think I always stretch myself too thin in the past. Like I would always take on too much because I never felt sufficient or like I was doing enough to be okay. And it took me a really long time to work out that was an endless, that was a pursuit with no end. So I think my boundaries are a lot better now. I think this year I've taken on a little bit too much, but I'm pretty open about that now because I think I know when I'm a little bit overloaded. Mm-hmm. So I just talked to her about it, and she's been very supportive. And I know what I need to do to kind of cut things off. So like the graduate course will end in a couple of months, and then I know I need to taper back on some other things and figure it out. So she's a great sounding board and very, very supportive through that. Even when I kind of, she ends up having to take on some more stuff because I'm stretched too thin. But we work really well together and help each other out.
That's awesome. It's I find everybody needs that somebody, whether that's a therapist or a spouse, partner, or a good friend, a brother or sister, or, somebody that is able to kind of call you out on your stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And you're able to be accountable with.
It's a gift. It really is. Someone who tell you really how you're doing. That's a gift.
Well, Ian, thank you so much for being on. This was an amazing conversation where I learned so much, just things that I can use with clients, things in my own life. So thank you.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure, John. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, I'll definitely stay in touch. I can't wait to hear more about the trainings and how the bench testing goes. I think that's going to be a really huge thing. That's going to be an amazing thing to watch kind of take off.
Thanks.
So
I hope so.
I look forward to that.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah. Take care. So that wraps up episode 52. Again, if you want to find out more about the Practice Imperfect podcast, you can check them out at practiceimperfectpodcast.com. Next episode will be OTC episode 53, and that'll actually be the end of season 2, where I'll be sitting down to talk with Coral Sanchez, a clinician out in California that works with 2 very important underserved populations. She works with the first responder community as well as the Latinx community. Take care. Well, if you liked what you heard, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you're catching this podcast. You can check out detailed show notes and any other resources given in the show at www.pfsonthecouch.com. If you'd like to stay up to date on upcoming episodes, guests, or contribute questions to the show, be sure to follow along on any of your favorite social media platforms. The author and host of this podcast is not engaged in a therapeutic relationship with the listener and cannot give counseling advice without a confidential appointment. Listeners should be sure to consult with a licensed therapist in their area or seek emergency medical attention if they are experiencing psychological difficulty. A special thanks to the band The Topsy-Turvies for the show theme song. Their song, Like a Living Dead, can be found at topsyturvies.bandcamp.com. The bump interview track was the song 1973 by Bruno E. The author and host of this podcast is John Dennis. Special thanks to show editor Casey Lehman and show producer Trevor Groff.